Dead Space, the original, was released in 2008. Now I never really played the game and I don't really know why. So when the remake released earlier this year, I thought, let's finally play the game. And I never did. Until now. Well, I haven't played the full game, but at least a bit of it. It was released in GamePass as a kind of Halloween celebration. Now I know it's not Halloween anymore, but it's still nice to play a scary game when everybody else is decorating their Christmas tree. We'll have a look, as always, if we can get some optimized settings, see why we chose our settings and see how each setting impacts the game. Welcome to Henkes Gaming, guess who I am? Well, let's have a look at the game running with these optimized settings right away. Now for this game I chose not to use any resolution scalers and put the actual resolution down, so we're looking at 1440p instead of 4K, but I think this looks great. I haven't really tried out 30 FPS, but the game is a bit more on the action heavy side, so I think 60 FPS is nice to have. Now to be honest, it's a bit weird that I chose not to use any resolution scalers, but then again, I am a weird man. Not as weird as these necromorphs though. These are weird and hideous. And hideous is a word I wouldn't use to describe myself. But enough about my weirdness. Why I didn't use any resolution scalers I will tell and show you later on, because I usually think resolution scalers make for a great way to improve performance. But yeah, with these optimized settings, this creepy game runs great, apart from some traversal stutter I must say, so when you enter a new area you might see some stuttering. And I'm afraid no matter what setting you lower, this will stay. Other than that, using these optimized settings we're almost all the time above 100 FPS. I think in this whole section I played I just dipped under 100 FPS only a few times. And also when using the optimized setting the game still looks great and it still has its creepy and eerie scary vibes. Some parts really gave me some Alien vibes and I love those Alien movies. Well, the original trilogy at least. And yes, it's a trilogy. I refuse to acknowledge the existence of Alien Resurrection. And mentioning that, isn't there a new Alien movie coming out in 2024? Romulus? Well, okay, back to Dead Space. A big spaceship, but with scary mutated zombies crawling out of air ducts instead of aliens. Well then, let's do a quick comparison running the game with the optimized settings against running the game on the Ultra preset on 4K. And I think the optimized settings hold up very well, and running around 58% better. That's a lot, but to be honest, I think only 13% of that performance win is due to the graphics settings. The other 45% come from lowering the resolution. Now, just some food for thought. My TV supports 50Hz, and since my FPS at the Ultra setting is 50 FPS at the lowest, I could consider playing at 50Hz V-Synced. Let me know in the comments down below if your TV supports 50Hz. Maybe it's an interesting video to do sometimes about 50Hz gaming. Well, let's go through the settings. And let's start at the video options. As I already said, I suggest turning down the resolution instead of using a resolution scaler. More on that later. So 1440p. This game is nice at 60 FPS, but maybe I will consider playing at 4K at 50 FPS, as I just told you, with the rest of my optimized settings set, of course. And then turn on V-Sync, unless your screen supports G-Sync or FreeSync, of course, and you want HDR set to automatic. At first I thought the HDR looked a bit weird, a bit greenish, but during my play throughout the game I got used to it and I thought it looked fine. Well, back to the display and graphics settings then, and we'll start adjusting things at the variable rate shading, which I would turn on. And then let's get all the options on screen quickly. But for the anti-aliasing, I would suggest TAA, so temporal anti-aliasing, and no DLSS or FSR. And leave the anti-aliasing quality to high. And graphics quality we set to custom, so we can customize them. And you want your light quality at medium, shadow quality at medium as well, and reflection quality set to at least high. I think going lower has quite a lot of graphical impact, so I wouldn't go lower. Volumetric resolution can be set to low, and ambient occlusion can be turned off. You could also set the ambient occlusion to the screen space ambient occlusion, so SSAO. I've chosen for a very small win in FPS and turned it off. And depth of field we leave at high. Before we continue looking at each setting, consider giving me a thumbs up. Or the middle finger up. But then it's best if you don't watch this video anymore. Well, let's quickly continue, because I'm curious, aren't you? Not curious about which finger you give me up, curious about the settings of course. Well then, let's go through each setting and starting off with the variable rate shading. Turning it on in this scene gives us a very minor improvement of about 2% in FPS. Of course, since this setting is a variable one, it could do something else somewhere else, but the bit I played I didn't really see any weird stuff with this setting on. Well, I did see weird stuff with this setting on. You see all kinds of weird stuff in this game, mainly the necromorphs, but no weird shading stuff related, I mean. With light quality, it's obvious that the low setting has strongly degraded lights, but medium, high or ultra don't really seem to matter. They all pretty much look the same to me, and performance-wise, they don't differ that much in performance as well. Sticking with medium, although I don't really know if it matters if you go for ultra or medium. And about the same seems to be the case for shadow quality. Low is missing some shadows, although giving the greatest performance win, but you don't want those shadows missing. Medium, high and ultra seem to look the same and perform about the same, although I think medium is just that very tiny little bit higher in FPS, maybe just 1%. The low shadow quality also seems to impact lights, which I would actually expect to be affected by the light quality setting, not the shadow quality setting. And since you want every light in this game to be on at all times, definitely keep the shadow quality on at least medium, I would say. And if you played the game a bit, you know that sometimes you have to turn off lights. And you don't want to turn off lights, you want them on. Now if we look a little bit further with the shadow quality, we can see that going from high to medium does impact some shadows in the distance. See that tube with the container above it in the distance? On high it has quite a bit more shadow than on medium. However, playing with the shadow quality on medium, I never really saw shadows popping in or anything. Or if they did so on high as well. So keeping this shadow at medium for the ever so slightly chance it runs better. And let's be honest, when you're playing the game you'll probably only look at the screen through your fingers, so you won't notice a shadow in the distance being a little less detailed. Or you only see a part of the screen because you're holding a pillow in front of your face. This game is so scary, I almost found it scary to look at my own footage while writing my script. Reflection quality up next, and this one is bigger than I first expected. Also, reflections are the reason I chose to stay on TAA instead of using DLSS or FSR. But first, the most obvious reflection. A scene reflected through water. Low and medium have about the same performance win of about 6%, but the quality of the reflection on medium is about the same as on high on ultra. Low definitely looks a bit muddier, but medium seems to be on par with the higher settings with the same performance win as the low setting. Now there seems to be more to reflections than just reflections of the world. In this shot, on the high setting, you see light reflecting on the screen and there's also light reflecting on the metal wall in the back. These reflections don't show up on the medium level, but I think these kinds of reflections give a great deal of atmosphere to the game. Let's have another look at this. Here we see the light the Ishimura text shines reflected on the metal path. Without these light reflections, the shot looks a bit more dull. Now setting the reflections to medium does give you a performance win of about 6% as mentioned earlier, but I think you should keep this setting at high. Okay, last example to get you convinced of using high. After you slaughter a lot of necromorphs in this room and after you've got your physical heart rate under control again, have a look around. At the high level we see that bluish light being reflected on the ground from that light in the back, and the light above Isaac has its light reflected on the metal bar next to the light. And you see these kinds of reflections all over the Ishimura, so if you can, leave those reflections too high. I really think they add to the atmosphere of the game. Now there is something else to notice in these reflections of light. The light reflected on the metal bar, it has a slight fizzle to it, and that fizzle is the reason I don't want to enable resolution scalers. Let's have a look at the entrance of the Ishimura again. So here we see, with the DLSS performance level, the light reflection really fizzles a lot, or shimmers a lot. I find that distracting, and because you have these light reflections at so many places in the game, you see that fizzle a lot in the game as well. Now with the DLSS quality level, the fizzle is less pronounced, but it's still there, and it's still pretty apparent. Using the temporal anti-aliasing, it's also still there, but at a minimal level. So this is why I would rather turn down my resolution than enable DLSS in this game. Of course, if you don't mind this fizzling, turn on DLSS, because you do get a sharper looking image that way. With FSR, the fizzle might be less pronounced, but I found some textures looked a bit too muddy, especially when you have little details like small tiles or something, so TAA. Volumetric resolution then, and this setting impacts the quality of the volumetric lighting, and this game is practically a showcase of volumetric lighting. Everywhere you look are foggy or steamy lights. And it has to be said, what is up with these futuristic spaceships and their lighting? Don't they have Philips Hue lights or something? Can't we just say, hey ship, activate the brightest lights you've got? No, we're stuck with zombie aliens and moody lighting. Now don't get me wrong, this moody lighting makes for great horror games. But well, I do think that this moody volumetric lighting looks great in Dead Space. On the lower settings the light does look a little bit different than on the higher settings, but what is it exactly? Is it only the color of the light? Ultra and high seem to be a bit more orange than medium and low do, but maybe it's just because of the smoke going by. However, I think at the low setting we get the same vibe as on the ultra setting. Now, maybe when you're playing at a lower resolution you might notice this setting a little bit more. Light may have a bit more of a shimmer to it, but playing on 4K or 1440p, I would definitely take that 8% performance win and turn volumetric lighting down to low, or volumetric resolution down to low. And then Ambient Occlusion, usually a setting where I think you can turn it down a lot, but you shouldn't turn it off. Here, however, I think you can turn it off. Ray-traced Ambient Occlusion delivers a bit of a more darker look, while screen-spaced Ambient Occlusion on the other hand delivers a bit of a more lighter look overall. Now turning Ambient Occlusion off, all the shadows in the tiny nooks and crannies are just gone. Screen-spaced Ambient Occlusion is the default if you select the Ultra preset, so Ray-traced Ambient Occlusion will cost you an extra FPS of about 10%, which I think is certainly not worth it. Turning Ambient Occlusion off gives you a win of 1% in FPS, which isn't a lot, but I think you might not even notice Ambient Occlusion being off while playing the game, so then it's 1% win in FPS for free. Now I always search around a bit to find where you see setting effects the best, and I had a really hard time with Ambient Occlusion. Playing the game, doubt you will ever notice differences in the Ambient Occlusion setting. So then, going back to our optimized settings, I think the game looks great and I don't think you really notice that much of the reduced settings. The optimized settings themselves, without lowering your resolution, are probably good for a win in FPS of about 13% compared to Ultra preset. The rest of the win we get here from turning down our resolution. The most important thing, we lost nothing of the game's atmosphere, I think. The creepy vibe is still maintained very well and the game looks great if you ask me. If you like scary games, give this one a go. I think it's a good one. And that is all I have to tell you about Dead Space. Thank you for watching and subscribing. Now be sure to have a look at the Game Awards, or JeffCon as Digital Foundry calls it. It's next week on December 7th. I'm curious about new titles more than I am at which game wins which award, but oh well. And then in 2 weeks I'll be having a look at Immortals of Avium. This has a playable demo up on Steam, so I'll be looking at that. It's also the first Unreal 5 title I will have a look at. Are settings still relevant in UE5? Will this channel still have a reason to exist in a UE5 world? Well, I'm very curious. We'll see in 2 weeks. If you can't wait 2 weeks, have a look at my Baldur's Gate video, and otherwise, till then, houdoe.
Quarantine lifted.